Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Progressively Incorrect. My name is Zach Groeschel, and I am so excited today to be bringing you another interview with one of my Steplab colleagues and one of the absolute experts when it comes to primary education, my good friend, Alex Gingell. We are going to be talking about some of his experience during the COVID pandemic and how it kind of sort of revamped the PD ecosystem at his school and what he's doing lately and how, what he's learned about instructional coaching. As you know, there are two sponsors to this podcast. The first is John Catt from Hash Out Learning, which publishes some of the best books in education. Go ahead and get a John Catt book. They just sent me a great new book from Sam Strickland about sort of education exposed. I'm really excited to kind of dig into that one, but check out all the books on the John Catt catalog, including my book, Just Tell Them the Power of Explanations and Explicit Teaching. Also, this podcast is sponsored by Steplab. I am the director of Steplab North America, and we put on events year-round and online. It's always changing. Go ahead and check out the links in the show notes and consider a new way to designing a PD program that involves coaching, peer observation, and drop-ins and a centralized management system that makes it all kind of work. I'm looking forward to chatting to you about that. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Yeah, I'm really good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's exciting. I know you're an experienced podcast guest, but I just really want to pick your brain on a few things that have come up over and over again about kind of the minutia, the details of putting together a really good PD program. So let's just get started. How about you introduce yourself to my audience?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not sure I am a sort of a series podcaster, but I love that introduction. So thank you for that. Yeah, so I'm Alex. I am Step Lab's engagement lead currently. So I work really closely with lots of schools, multi-school organizations in the UK, but also kind of globally to help ensure and support leaders to maximize the power and the potential of our platform in order to deliver some really high quality, high impact professional development for teachers in their schools. But before I did this, I was a head teacher or a principal of a primary school in the UK. Before that, I had been sort of a senior leader in various schools in London, but it was really as a head teacher that I found the power of coaching as a platform. It's also as a head teacher that I implemented an instructional coaching and whole staff rehearsal program that led to real clarity and consistency for our staff and our students, but also this great culture around professional learning that became a real buzz in our school. So that's me. That's a little bit about my experience, but yeah, really happy to kind of be here with you today.
It's interesting because you mentioned that you became very concerned with the PD program at your school. And so many principals that work around here, I don't think they see themselves as needing to have that responsibility. And we don't have inspectorates or anything like that, so it's just the wild, wild west. But a lot of folks just kind of sit in the managerial side of things. Then I always say if they weren't running a school, they'd run a ski resort, right? It's like if there's no difference when it comes.
Yeah,
We're just moving bodies around and getting people to be on time to stuff.
yeah.
Why, in your view, is that insufficient for leadership?
I think it's a good question. I think, we do as leaders and as school leaders need to have some of the ski resort. I like that analogy, but the ski resort there. And certainly at the beginning of my journey at our school, it was very much like the first opening up of schools after lockdown during COVID. So I had to do a lot of that managerial stuff because we simply had to at that point in order to get people back and feeling really good about being there. However, what became very apparent, especially at that point, but kind of very generally in our school, was that we needed our students to have the absolute best experience of education. A, because they had missed a lot, but B, because that also wasn't necessarily their journey at that school at that stage in our school improvement cycle. So I had to move away from being quite managerial and operational to actually taking a step back and looking more strategically at what was going to make the difference for our students, not only in terms of their like learning, but also their behavior and their attendance at school, and how are we going to get them back to the place where they could really, really thrive as learners in our organization. And that's why I made it my priority to really focus on developing teaching, because expert teachers can cause somewhere between, like, 3 to 5 times more learning for a group of students compared to a novice teacher. But improving teaching is the single biggest lever that we've got to improve outcomes, which is going to improve those life chances for those students in our schools. And that ultimately is what we are about in education.
It's
So I don't know if that answers that question, but like that's a little bit of like the narrative around how we got to that point.
Yeah, I'm just curious. You keep mentioning this, like the need to like secure like certain foundations, like behavior, curriculum, trust. Like how do those open up doors for coaching and improving teaching? But also like what were those things you did in terms of like getting those
Yeah.
foundations set?
So when I arrived, the only consistency in our school was the inconsistency, and students moved from one class to the next, went on completely different journeys depending on the teacher that they had. And it wasn't that teaching was ineffective, but it was that there was real difference in terms of the experience students were getting, and it almost was a bit of a lottery, and that just wasn't okay. So what we needed to do was have this very like consistent approach to getting behavior into the right place, so that when students moved from one classroom to the next, they didn't have to relearn how they were supposed to engage in learning in that classroom, because it just was the norm. Similarly, we had to sort some issues around curriculum out, because there were different expectations in different classes, and students are on a curriculum journey. There needs to be a very clear picture when it comes to the journey they're on. So those foundations, I think, are so key, because something like professional development can't fix a problem. Like instructional coaching as an approach isn't going to fix something that is more foundational. It's only going to be able to support growth if it's growing on stable underpinnings. So, like those foundations had to be in place so that students were getting a bit of a more consistent approach, but so that also teachers knew a little bit more about what to expect.
You mentioned trust, and that's also, it's like I can imagine this going another way and sort of in a negative sense of like, the behavior's never good enough, the curriculum's never good enough, and we sort of never get to the teaching, and you're always laying the foundations without ever getting to, I think, what's more fulfilling for teachers, what ends up actually making kids think more critically and so on, as a teacher who asks juicy questions and has really has really mastered these techniques. When did you get the sense it was time to move into coaching and into addressing the instruction?
For a teacher in a classroom, the reason we go into this job is so that we can support children to develop and learn more and grow. And if you are finding that things like behavior are getting in the way of that, that's taking you away from the thing that you actually want to do in the first place. Once we had laid those foundations and we had a really clear behavior approach across our school, we had done some work on the curriculum to make it very streamlined in terms of the progression through our curriculum for students and for teachers. It was really clear then that people were ready to start thinking a little bit about the teacher development aspect. So the other thing that I'd kind of inherited at that point was a fairly kind of old school, I would say traditional, high stakes observation culture, where staff were receiving quite long lesson observations, maybe twice or 3 times a year, and they were like given quite a lot of feedback through those. They were quite closely linked to kind of performance management and appraisal and quality assurance. And that had led to this sense that there was a bit of distrust around receiving feedback and having people in your classroom. So when the foundations were right, we then needed to start just slightly addressing that culture issue so that actually we could support teachers to feel comfortable receiving lesson feedback on their teaching, so that they were happy to kind of improve their practice. So we did some work around that behavior and around the curriculum and those consistencies. Then we had to unpack some work around culture and trust, because there was quite a lot of fear around being observed. as a teacher at that school at that point. Simply being watched often like made some teachers less effective than they would have been behind closed doors. And feedback at that time for our staff would have resulted in like a long list of things that they needed to do to improve, which only really added to the noise that they were facing in their roles. So we removed those high stakes observations, and that was a massive cultural kind of reset for us. Like we separated professional development from accountability and quality assurance, and we normalized being observed and removed the threat around it so that staff began to see feedback as being genuinely supportive, not kind of like surveillance.
I have so many questions about this. This is the number one thing, by the way, that comes up in my demos and my talks with different schools around Steplab is that they're asking how do you separate these two things? And they're also wondering like how can my leadership who does have to take on the accountability responsibilities to some extent, how do we get them to wear different hats or meet with different people that they're not necessarily evaluating and so on? And I have ideas for that, and I kind of have a set of recommendations. But what are your thoughts on this? Like, we can kind of get into the reason why, because even people listening here who really buy into these evaluations, they're like, why? This is a great tool, and I don't think so. But how do you get that kind of structure in place so that principals can do an element of coaching, and we're sort of de-emphasizing or downplaying an element of the accountability during those conversations?
There is a place for accountability in the school system. Don't get me wrong. We are responsible for the education of young people, and that's a huge responsibility. And we need to be making sure that we're doing a really, really good job. I think from my perspective, I saw accountability impacting teachers in a way that prevented them from being able to make the sort of progress and development in their teaching that I knew that they could if there was just more support around feeding like key things around what makes great teaching into the professional development system. So we made some very conscious decisions to separate professional development from performance management and accountability. And practically, that meant that anybody that was responsible for quality assurance couldn't, for example, be the coach of a teacher who was being coached for their development, right? So we
Yeah.
had to make some quite careful decisions there around staffing. We also were very, very clear with our teaching team what meant professional development and what meant quality assurance, and that like professional development was this entitlement for them, and that coaching and our group PD was going to be all about supporting them to get better, not because they weren't good enough, but because we can always be better. And the quality assurance side of things was there to make sure that we were doing right by our students. And so making that very, very clear from the beginning helped us normalize the feedback they received through coaching and help them see it as supportive rather than something that was being used to kind of judge them for their professional kind of quality assurance.
Here typically schools will have a principal and an assistant principal, and they both draw from a hat who they're meant to do the accountability piece with. They fill out some rubric. Dylan William talks about the rubrics are all terrible, right? So they fill out
Yeah.
this rubric, and they just kind of go through this little game that we have to do. But then what my advice tends to be is if you have that setup, just simply tell these are the people I'm coaching and these are the people I'm evaluating, and we don't mix the two. And then the other thing is if they only have one principal and that's the only person that is even available to do coaching or anything else, that would be that because you have Steplab, it's a separate system, and you have your evaluation tool because they're all digital now. It's a separate system, and you tell everyone as very clearly as possible, look, the reason why we adopted Steplab is so I could give informal, non-judgmental feedback around your development, and we couldn't use this other system to do it. And I didn't want to confuse anybody. And that very much is, I think, the kind of pathways I usually
Yeah.
take. And it works perfectly fine when you do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It
And also, I feel like as well, rubrics don't give you, or they don't give the teacher a very clear understanding as to what they necessarily need to do better, how to do it, and why that's important. It's very much like it's a tick box exercise rather than it actually feeding into real growth for a teacher and therefore the students that they are working with. So, like, we still had some quality assurance processes that were in place, don't get me wrong, but Steplab and the professional development that we were providing was all about this is how you can improve your teaching, and this is why it really, really matters for you and for your students.
Yeah, it's the culture around these observations here is just so bad. And not it's the strangest thing because none of the leaders want to do it. They sometimes I mean, sometimes their secretary is doing a lot of like scheduling for them and they're spending a lot of time just bopping around into classrooms, being in the back like a ghost, typing into this form that, and they go into trainings and they practice scripting how to do it, and they try to, we have to have iterator reliability and it has to be valid. And it's just this very strange
Yeah.
cultural expectation in schools that I don't understand. I don't understand.
Yeah.
Am I right in thinking that England shifted away from this culture to some extent in the past decade or so?
To some extent, yes. I mean, there are still some schools who maybe aren't quite as forwards in their work around this as others. But, broadly speaking, things did shift away from that kind of tick box culture. And I think, actually the message that we need to be sharing is like if you spent the time that you're spending on that, actually on thinking carefully about how you build really impactful approaches to professional development for your teachers, those things won't be a problem because people will be way more up for developing their practice. They'll know what they need to do. They'll have the time and space and that they'll feel comfortable giving stuff a go in their classroom and trying to embed those things in their practice. If we just redirect our time like away from that evaluation into the kind of development piece.
I always ask, like, when's the last time you fired someone based on this process, right? And it's like, oh, like 3 years ago, And it's like, and when's the last time you gave someone, an extra bonus money, for being really good at it? And they're like, well, never. It's like, what is this for? Like,
Yeah.
I really, and do you not know? Or would you not know who is a good and a bad teacher on if you got rid of this process? That same kind of that sense of like this person typically drops the ball and the kids are always
Yeah.
in the hallway and he does, would you lose that insight? I really doubt you would it's the
Yeah,
strangest
exactly.
thing.
But
Let's
I do love that. I love that Dylan William piece around the fact that like wasn't it like different leaders spotted entirely different things when they were evaluating performance, and so it's just a little bit pointless.
I could go on and on about this, but
Sure.
eventually you became convinced that coaching was the right approach. How did you build up your expertise around coaching before kind of, launching this school wide? It's an ask of folks to start to learn about something that may be completely new to them. What was your process?
Yeah, I think the first thing to call out there is actually that like there was a very deliberate process that I went through. So, I read loads of I saw loads of the research around instructional coaching. It was clear to me that the evidence was strong and these studies were showing huge improvements in student outcomes when teachers were receiving instructional coaching. But what we also know about good implementation is that it doesn't happen overnight, right? So my first job really was to know a little bit more. And I wasn't an expert in any way at the beginning of this journey, but a couple of things happened. The first was we recruited a new deputy head, vice principal at our school, and she had this like deep coaching experience and real credibility, having led a program before. She was absolutely amazing, actually, as a leader. So that really helped, which meant that my kind of role then became to help create the conditions for it to thrive, really champion it as a kind of cultural thing, but also to learn alongside people. So I continued reading some of the research. I actually enrolled on the Steplab certificate in coaching leadership, which is a super rigorous year-long course that we run around how to lead coaching effectively. And as part of that, I had to coach, and I also wanted to be coached. So I gave myself a teaching commitment. My deputy, Jess, the vice principal, she coached me. We were kind of coaching each other, and we started to kind of film what we were doing, which became really, really great later on when we launched with our team. So I basically was very honest with myself that I wasn't the expert, but that I had to learn more alongside the team so that I could champion this culture in our school.
It's interesting you mentioned the being coached aspect. I find that actually it's not woo woo like oh you should practice and it'll be a fun little activity or an icebreaker. I actually believe if just the feeling of someone uh giving you feedback really does ground you in a sense of like what it's like to be a teacher and what it's like to feel like your entire identity is being
Yeah,
attacked, right?
yeah,
Why these prompts that we've designed around tell me about the moment and how could we and I noticed and I have a suggested step, why this kind of flow of responsive coaching is critical for everyone except for that one teacher who's in your office saying, "Tell me whatever I need you need me to do because I'm going to quit otherwise." For practically everyone else, they need this, right? Um, when you were doing this, I imagine some level of like vulnerability of like sharing this with your staff. How did those conversations kind of initially start?
yeah. I mean, I think vulnerability was essential at this point because I was about to ask people to take part in coaching, which was going to be very different from any kind of professional development that they had been used to before. And I had some staff at the school that had been there for sort of 15 plus years, right? So this was going to be very, very new for them. And by actually experiencing it myself, I put myself in some ways in those shoes. And it helped when it came to kind of selling coaching because it was very clear, like I was the head teacher, I was running this school and I was being coached. So it wasn't that coaching is just for like struggling teachers, it's for everybody. It's something that can support you no matter what part of the career you're in. Um, and I think what those films of our sessions between my coach and I also helped do was just clarify the ins and outs of the process. And it just like made it very, very clear what to expect when it came to coaching, which again was essential for people to understand what it meant for them. It's so funny. I remember the first step that my coach Jess set me was just like this really small thing about where I was stood in the classroom. And I realized that I just stood in the same place every single time that I taught. And it wasn't necessarily the best place to be. And it was like no one had ever mentioned that sort of thing to me before. They had never paid that much attention to what I was doing
Yeah.
in an observation, just that like one little thing, and it made me feel like, my God, she was really looking, like she was really paying attention in that session. And I'm not sure if we checked ourselves as leaders that we're always quite as attentive as we probably could be when we go into a classroom, but it was phenomenal. So it kind of helped not only break some barriers down for staff, but gave me a real sense, having received it, of like the power that this could bring to our wider team when we launched it.
I'm trying to think of that step that was like that for me. I have a couple. They didn't say it this way, but why is it that you have the document camera on for an irrelevant thing and you're talking? Like, what was the point of having that up there? And it was like, I don't know. I just forgot to turn it off. It's like, yeah, turn it off. That
Yeah,
was one. And I remember the other. I think one that was more impactful was just the sort of pastor's perch, like standing in place
yeah,
before you go and do active observation. That I would just basically run at the first kid that raised their hands, and they're like, tell them to put their hand down. I was like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that
Yeah.
makes so much
But
sense.
like there were things for me that I mean, I had considered these before, but I guess I hadn't really unpacked them as much before. But even the power of just scanning and not saying anything and just like deliberately like scanning a classroom, just the power that that brings in terms of student attention and that sort of things just really made me think much more about my practice. But it took someone just like calling it out and just having a discussion about a really small like tiny little thing to unleash some really big thinking for me.
Yeah, the folks that have been coached or had an experience like you're describing, they become kind of converts because it just doesn't make a lot of things stop making sense, right? The whole school PD in which it's never at the Goldilocks level. It typically has to involve a lot of sort of just let's create a baseline, kind of a norming type of situation. And when you're thirsty for growth and when you're excited about your practice and you start to spend years not really having any kind of constructive feedback, it starts to it starts to bring you down, you know? And so I'm glad you went this route. What was it like when you first like launched this thing? Like what was the setup? How did you get going? Did you use the full instructional coaching framework, like the Steplab approach, or was it like a kind of a lighter version? I'm curious about all these things.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this in quite a lot of the work that I now do with schools that I support because I guess I didn't make the most effective choices straight away. So, despite having done some really good groundwork around learning about what the model looked like, doing lots of training myself, being coached, and practicing coaching, when it came to launch, we launched full scale, every teacher, every week, across the whole school, on the whole of the Step Lab library, which, for those people that know it, it's incredibly powerful, but it's quite big. Like there's so many steps to focus on in that library. It's probably too much initially. And what I quickly realized was that one of the key things that was supposed to help teachers improve that you activate through coaching is the rehearsal part. So rehearsal as a kind of professional development mechanism is really crucial to the coaching cycle because it's the part of coaching where you start to jumpstart the habit formation for your teachers and they start to get a feel for what that looks like, what that area of practice looks like for them in their own classrooms, and they start to try it out like in the safety of the feedback conversation. However, staff really didn't like it. Like the staff feedback around that particular part of coaching was really not positive. They felt it was really uncomfortable. Some of them felt awkward and embarrassed by that part because they had never before had to stand up in front of someone away from their classroom where they actually deliver these things and try them out. And I reflected that along with a couple of other things, we hadn't done enough to really normalize the mechanism of rehearsal in our coaching cycle. So, like that was the biggest learning point for me that then made us step back a little bit, pare our approach back. We actually moved to a fortnightly, every 2 week coaching cycle at that stage. And what we did was we built in some whole staff opportunities to rehearse things together. So we came together in the school hall, all of the teachers, all of the support staff, once a week for 10 minutes. And we just started to rehearse key parts of our practice that we all wanted to embed consistently. And what that did was it just made it really clear that rehearsal isn't this thing that needs to be embarrassing. We framed it very professionally. I modeled with other members of the leadership team, like how rehearsal can look. We kind of put ourselves out there again and were the ones that were the first people to kind of try rehearsal in front of other people. And it just made that part of coaching really unlock longer term for teachers and coaches in those feedback sessions. So I can't really remember if that answered your initial question because I often get carried away when I talk about rehearsal because I love it. I absolutely love it as a mechanism. But hopefully that does answer that question.
Do you mind problem solving a little bit with me,
Yeah.
rehearsal? Because I'm a big believer as well, and I realize as I have to try to scale this technique to other folks that they're not me, right? They don't have like I will persist through things like this regardless, right? And so I had a thing at my school. It was called Zach's One Thing, and it was basically what we now call group rehearsal, right? And that
Yeah.
one, and it's funny. It was before the documentary came out. I had created a. I didn't have a non-example in mind, but there was something of a template that I was brewing, and all it was Zach's nerdy self is going to come here, and he's got this one thing he's really excited excited about, and he's going to model it for you, and then you're going to pair up and you're going to do it no matter what. Humor him. He just loves this so much. And over
Yeah.
time it was people started to look forward to that thing because it was the one thing that didn't waste their time in that entire hour they were there, right? Um, However, there's a lot of fear around rolling this out for other folks that that don't see it the same way I do, or don't feel like they don't feel like that they're confident in front of other folks. They're also just afraid to be happy with 99% of my staff are doing this. There's just one curmudgeon who just is really grumpy and doesn't want to do it. That is enough to destroy the whole thing. Maybe problem solve with me how you would incrementally make this part of the culture.
One of the best things that I have heard, well, not one of the best things I've heard Pep say generally, but Pep's McRae, our colleague, did an evidence snack a few months ago about rehearsal, and one of his top tips was like, just do it, which is a really important tip because everything is uncomfortable at first. And the more you do it, the more you do break down that discomfort. But I think, what we now support schools to consider is how you can gradually build up from perhaps just rehearsing with a small group of people who are really up for it to begin with, and just like start to normalize it among that team of people before you might then invite some other people into that group and start to build it that way. So like start with your most on board people and then gradually grow and capture their thoughts and how they reflect on it and what they say is really impactful for them, and try and just share that across your team in briefings or in emails or whatever you can do to kind of spread that voice. So that's one option. I think the other option is to just gradually build in the different parts of rehearsal. And by that, I mean, when you rehearse, you spend time, first of all, planning and scripting, right, for what that thing is going to look like for you in your classroom. So here's the technique we're working on. All we're going to do today is you're just going to plan and you're going to script what that's going to look like for you in your classroom. Then over time, you might say, right, well, now, like what we're going to do is we're just going to look at some models of what that looks like in practice. Fine. And then now what we're going to do is we are going to give this a go. We're just going to try it once. We're going to rehearse once, get a feel for it, and then we're going to go and try and embed it. And then over time, you can build to those multiple rounds of rehearsal where people are giving feedback to each other in between those rounds. And that's what we would be aiming for. But that's, I guess, a kind of way in is starting with a small group, building just the scripting part in, then gradually building up the rounds of rehearsal that you prompt so that over time people do feel confident doing it.
I love that, by the way. I always think like sometimes it's a branding thing, and I hate it when people just are like, we have to change the name in this. I almost wonder about when you roll it out as a leader, you go, in this school, we have a rehearsal based coaching model. And I mean, because that's the part that's the weirdest for people. Even though in sports, they understand that the coach is always going to make the players play in front of him, is always going to bring them back from a moment of playing and have them tweak something and go back and do it again. And we're going to have multiple rounds of this kind of interactive teaching approach. I mean, this is teaching we're talking about.
Yeah.
And it would be great if ChatGPT could create two different side things where there's one where the coach is just sitting in a circle, knee to knee with all his players. And is that coaching? Well, it's only one small part of it because there's a whole repertoire. The main part is this back and forth interaction of modeling
Yeah.
and practice that occurs. Maybe it's more being very explicit early on about what the model is and doing kind of what you did with me at the ambassadors program and showing like different versions of it and how it looks, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I think being very upfront about what it is, also why you're doing it, and overselling the power of it. So, we started every single group rehearsal session by reminding everybody why this really mattered, why this practice of taking yourself away from your classroom and practicing key moves that you're going to make back in the classroom, why that was so beneficial. So we just oversold that message all the time. And I think one thing that is, I guess, a bit of a warning for people doing it is not to at any point apologize for doing it. do not go into rehearsal and be like, guys, I'm really sorry, but we're going to have to rehearse today, because you instantly undermine, the power that actually this act has for their development. So yeah, a little bit of a top tip, I guess, there.
Yeah. My line at the very beginning is I'll just say, humor me for a moment as we go through this. And but really, I think that the modeling and the scripting set it up so well if you plan those two things in advance. Because it also, the modeling tends, this is inside baseball for everyone, but who cares? The modeling tends to also almost bypass some of the awkwardness of the agree on step, where you're like, you know what? Let me just show you. And you sort of stop describing, and you just stand up and you do something, and then you're like, I've seen so many coachees, having done many of these, stand up themselves at that point, and they come right next to you and they go, no,
Yeah.
no, 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 it's like this. And you're sitting here and you're like, I'm having a conversation about this. We're weighing the options of what's the best way to roll this out as colleagues, and it completely changes given that sometimes those steps before the rehearsal, scripting and modeling, and a really great clear agree on step ends up just almost making rehearsal inevitable, if that makes sense, you
Yeah,
know?
for sure. I think modeling, just again, when you live model, you demonstrate a little bit more vulnerability that just also, I think, can relax the other person. And like you say, often they'll just sort of stand up and want to join in. But like I think that it goes a long way to demo that vulnerability that you are expecting from them when they stand up and they try something out. So I think it can go a long way for sure as a coach.
I also want to like relate this to like with students that are shy or they're not confident. Usually the recommendation is to do like a pre-call or like a warm call. And what I will often do is suggest that the child writes down their answer in a stop and jot, and then when I go over to them and I pre-call and I say, so I'd really like you to share. It's okay to just read what you have on your piece of paper. And reading it takes away a lot of the like, I have to think on my feet. It's is all about my performance. When no, it's like you're just reading it. And so that script is very interesting thing, almost a third point of communication, I guess, where they pull out this script and they're just like, you just want me to read it? Yeah, sure. So it's going to sound like this. And I'm like, great. And in this part, and now we're doing it, right? We're sort of using the script to occasion the maybe more realistic version of the rehearsal. Have you kind of seen the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the key thing with scripting is that it helps you stick with fidelity to the thing that you're trying to achieve. There are certain moves, certain approaches that you can take in your classroom that are going to lead to improved outcomes for students. Therefore, let's give ourselves the best chance to actually deliver that by preparing for it. And a script is a perfect way to try and internalize some of that language and how you're going to run that thing before you actually go and do it. I mean, Steplab, when we deliver training, we don't just turn up and give it a go. Like we have planned really carefully the training we deliver. We've scripted our key explanations so that we can make sure they land with our audience. And it's a similar thing for teachers. The power of that script is key in actually doing something better, doing the best thing for your students in your classroom.
Love it. Well, let's go to my next question, which is around sort of this is what everyone asks, which is like sort of around structural changes, timetabling, and things like that. How did you make sure that the things that are really important to teachers and to their learning, like, for example, their planning time, was protected? And how did you make sure that coaching wasn't just sort of taking over other opportunities that are also, vital for student success?
Great and very important thing to consider is the structural conditions and the structures that you're going to put in place in order to make this work. And we can't just do more in schools. Teachers are already doing loads. School leaders are already pushed and pulled in different directions. You can't just add something else in. So we did a bit of work drawing on Hamilton, Hatton, and Williams Making Room for Impact, which is like a great book on de-implementation in order to implement something effectively. And we had to remove certain things, reduce certain things, and slightly like re-engineer and replace things. So we took away those high stakes observations, first of all, because that wasn't leading to improvement for our staff. We reduced our staff meeting time. So we used to have a weekly Wednesday afternoon after school meeting that was an hour. We reduced that time so that we could build time for the coaching feedback to happen for people. And we had to, stop doing some good stuff in those meetings to do even better things through coaching. Like I had to make a financial commitment to this, and it is a very, very difficult thing to do, particularly at the moment when no school has any money, like particularly in the UK. Schools are stretched ever tighter, ever thinner. So, but I did commit to giving staff an extra bit of release time every week. So they already had like 10% of their timetable is kind of the standard here. I gave them a little bit more every week because I wanted them to have time to plan those changes that they were going to be coached on and how they were then going to go and do something differently in their classroom. And I think the other thing that we made a really conscious decision to do was to stop spending time together talking about admin things. Like we used to have a weekly meeting where we would just share messages and what was going on and who needed to be where and that sort of thing. And actually, on reflection, that stuff can be done in other ways. We used that time instead for our rehearsal that I mentioned earlier. So we went through a process of thinking, what can we stop doing? Not because it's not good, but because this is going to be even better. And how can we slightly change our other approaches so that we're still doing these things, but we're doing them slightly differently?
It sort of sounds like it begins with designing things based on the analysis of that you do rather than the other way around, which is like this is what exists and we have to make do with what is already in place. It seems like taking a step back and thinking about what do we de-implement, what opportunity costs are there in certain activities, what do we treasure for little reason other than it's just there and we've always done it, and let's maybe repurpose it. It sounds like
I,
great leadership,
I mean, I think there was something that came up when I was doing some training a few months ago that really resonated with me, which was that I found it quite uncomfortable stripping our weekly staff meetings back because I had been very used to thinking, well, I've only got an hour a week with the team. We need to cram it full of stuff, and we've got so much that we need to cover over the year that we ended up jumping from one topic to another week on week on week. So at primary, for example, we teach every subject. So we would have a staff meeting about English. We'd have some training on maths. We'd have some training on science. Then we'd move to religious education. Like we would jump all over the place. And someone referred to that recently as PD tourism, where you are just visiting these things. You're not really understanding what makes them work and getting the chance to dig into them. So the biggest fear for me was, well, we have to do these things. Like we've always done it this way. We can't possibly not do that. But the moment that we took some of those things back, we actually started to see greater impact in the things that we needed impact in. We just completely cut that back, had coaching time instead as part of that time. And it made such a difference to our teachers on the ground in classrooms that we just didn't see before. So
I call that form of PD speed dating is my
yeah,
yeah,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. You never get to know
Yeah,
them.
yeah.
Alex, it is so fantastic to finally have you on the podcast. We are going to be meeting up in New York City and
Uh,
certainly many more times in this great land called the United States of America, I'm sure.
sure.
What does it look like, just real quickly? I know we're at the top of the hour. What does it look like to come to a Steplab instructional coaching intensive?
It will look like probably some of the best training that you've ever received. And I know I'm biased because I work with Steplab, but I haven't always. And I did used to go to these training sessions. So, like, they are very, very full on, but very, very impactful days. You are going to really dig into and deconstruct what makes a really good coaching cycle. We're going to look at the observation process and how you can really sharpen that. We're going to look at how you can give feedback to teachers and take them through a process of really understanding pedagogy and what it means to be a great teacher. And we're going to look at some of the mechanics of the process so that by the end of the day, you feel super confident at going back into school and coaching teachers to be the best that they can be for the students that they serve.
Love it. And everyone that came to one of our 3 last year has then followed up and been like, how do we make this happen here? How can I make that experience occur in my school district and so on. So it's going to be fun. And of course, New York City is just an amazing place to be. What a way to get off work on a Friday, fly yourself to the best city in the world and just have a blast. And of course, we'll set up some happy hour scheme, there'll be something, right? So I'm looking forward to it. Alex, you are invited back on at any time. I'd love to pick your brain about these details. And listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to Progressively Incorrect every week. We'll keep on bringing you great content and awesome resources, which you can always access in the show notes. Give this thing a 5-star review, pass it around, and keep following along every week. Thank you so much.